Hi guys, it is a cool, gloomy summer day here in an undisclosed location in western New York. I don't know if we're looking at clouds or wildfire smoke from 3,000 miles away as a global industrial civilization collapses around us on this gloomy Monday morning, August 20th, 2018, where I am thrilled to bring to Collapse Chronicles an interview with someone other than an old white man, talking about the collapse of global industrial civilization. This young man is about 3 weeks away from his 25th birthday, going on 25 years old, looking towards his future. This is Brother Antonio Reid from North Carolina, from Boone, North Carolina. I met Antonio about a year ago on another channel that we don't talk about here on Collapse Chronicles, and we were discussing his plans for the future. He was getting ready to graduate college at Appalachian University, and someone, whether it was me or someone, asked him what his plans for the future were after graduating from college, and his answer was, "I plan to be scrounging for food." And so we're going to expand upon his plans for the future, and we're going to hear from someone who gets it, a 25-year-old who gets it. So Antonio Reid, say hello to the folks, and we will just dive right in.
All right. This. Well, hello everybody. My name's Antonio Reid. I do have to correct Sam. It is pronounced Appalachian.
Yes.
So I don't get in trouble at home.
Yes, he's from North Carolina. I'm from Georgia. Anyway.
So, but I'm happy to be here and ready for this discussion.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about with Antonio is, as I say, expanding upon scrounging for food for the balance of his lifetime. Now, Antonio, this man, he is so far along the collapse path that I guess a lot of it is self-study. He can explain that to us. But Antonio, generally speaking, I want to hear from someone. I mean, literally from your heart. You're 3 weeks away from turning 25 years old. You have read the handwriting on the wall. More than most people, 3 times your age, about what is coming down the pike in this country and on this planet. And just tell us how it feels to be a 25-year-old in the year 2018 looking into your future and what's coming down the pike, and just rip with it, and I'll interrupt you whenever I need some clarification. Go for it, brother.
Well, one of the best parts is I don't have to plan for retirement. So I don't have to get my finances in order. But more seriously, it's definitely been interesting. I do suffer a little bit from a lack of ambition in my professional life. But I don't know, I was telling Sam last night that one of the most critically interesting parts of this entire experience is really how people respond when you talk about this situation, when you talk about this crisis. People don't want to talk about what's happening. They'll mention maybe we had a weird tornado or a flood, but no one wants to talk about the context of that. And that's been kind of the most frightening scenario for me. But I'm not worried in the sense that I'm scared. I think I do have a good idea of what's coming for us, what's coming for me. I do wrestle with that daily, especially before I go to bed. But I think I make it through. I came up to Angelica, New York, and see Sandy Shallis and Sam Mitchell. So
for our party for the collapse.
For the collapse.
Now, when you were talking about there, he was by far the youngest person at this party. One thing I wanted you to expand upon when you're talking about people not talking about this subject. Now, he has never mentioned since it's now Monday. I met this young man on Thursday. He has never mentioned the most recent video game that he's into. He has never mentioned professional sports. One time has never left your mouth. Uh, what are but I feel like he's not representative of folks in their 20s. So talk about that. How much, what percentage of your time do you spend with your peers talking about the single biggest story in the history of humanity?
All of my friends know who I am, what I stand for, and my philosophy. So around people my age, I'm definitely more open about it. It starts politically, because of course everything about climate is political. That is our denial, our response, the lack thereof, and our cultural values. But I find that younger people are generally more interested, at least in having the conversation, meaning that they don't represent my view. Younger people do tend to bring it up a little bit more, not on a very deep and detailed level, but I find the most hesitancy around people who are 35 and up, a total inability to really connect with, well, not only, the world around them, but to the earth in general. I think that the older you are, unfortunately, that means you're more civilized, and what that means is you're less connected to the earth, less connected to other people, less connected to nature, and so less willing to talk about these problems.
Yeah, well, I just want to throw this little story in because make sure the neighbors aren't. We were down talking to the neighbors up here last night, and literally the sun was being blocked by the wildfire smoke. We're in New York State. Literally, the sun was being blocked out by the wildfire smoke from 3,000 miles away, and Antonia and I were commenting on this, and the people who we were talking to just kind of nodded, and then the conversation immediately went to the best roller coasters at Coney Island and Disneyland. It is where the Nathan's hot dog eating
Yes,
contest. As the sun was being blocked out by wildfire smoke, it was just such a classic illustration of when someone has a sign of the collapse of global industrial civilization literally hanging in the sky in front of them, and they were talking about the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. I just thought that was a fun story that Antonio got to share in yesterday. So anyway, Antonio, just cut to the chase. What is your vision? I'm 58 years old. I'm glad I'm not getting ready to turn 25 in the year 2018. Are you ever going to be a 58-year-old man? And if so, what the hell is it going to look like in 30, whatever it is, close to 35 years down the line, according to your reading of the tea leaves?
I tell people this who are twice my age, so it's around 50. I seriously doubt that I'm going to make it to 50. And if I do, it won't be in any pleasant condition. I don't think that we have a lot more time to live this way. And I don't mean that we're all going to go extinct in the next 18 months like someone else is purportedly saying. But I do mean that a way of life has to come to an end. And what that means for me is, I was telling Sam the other day, just looking at NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, their sea level rise models. If we get 3 feet by 2060, which is predicted, and that might be conservative, you may argue with that, but let's stay conservative. That means we're going to start seeing the abandonment of nearly all coastal cities. Actually, when I'm 10 years older than Sam is right now, And of course, you can't see that. If something like that is going on, there are serious implications riding up into that moment. And that's just the sea level rise. It doesn't include what's happening with temperature rise, which is much more sporadic, much more unstable. So I don't think that I'm going to be growing up living in the suburbs with a white picket fence mowing my lawn on Saturday morning.
What will you be doing?
I think I was right just a year ago, scavenging for food. When I made that statement originally, I wasn't saying that the second I graduated I'm going to be on the ground somewhere scavenging for food. But I do think the 2020s are going to be a very, very challenging time for humanity and industrial civilization. I don't know what that means for me directly. I'm playing it by day. I'm not prepping.
Why not?
I don't think anybody wants to be around in this world.
Now, you do have one can of SpaghettiOs.
I do have one can of
Can
SpaghettiOs.
you tell us why?
I have one can of SpaghettiOs in my closet at home. For the moment that my neighbor realizes that there's no more food on the grocery store shelves and nor will there ever be again. He has 2 small children. I'm sure they're going to want to be fed. So when he has the strength, the audacity to come blowing through my door with a shotgun.
Which he will.
Which he will.
Which he will.
I have a can of SpaghettiOs for him as his reward.
Well, how about when your second neighbor shows up the next day?
Well, I'll be gone. I'm hoping. I'm not just going to hand him the last can of SpaghettiOs.
He's going to have to kill you for
He's
it.
going to have to. He's going to have to put that shotgun in my face. Hopefully, it's a double barrel, so there's no complications after the initial shot. But you know, if my neighbor wants my bodily remains.
That'll be your third neighbor. Well, obviously, macabre, dark humor is one coping strategy. It's the main one I use at this point. So you and I agree on the absolute futility of prepping. Now, you mentioned your neighbor with 2 small children. Are you planning to bring small children into this planet in your future? Do you see fatherhood as part of your life map?
Absolutely not. I just finished college, and I watched, and I know that they say scientifically you can't watch a climate transition within years, which of course you can't. I saw at my own school, a place that's usually getting 3 feet of snow in the winter, hit near 80 degrees in February. If you are born today, by the time that you are in high school, the atmosphere would have been pushed back nearly 65 million years, the time of the dinosaurs, before you graduate. That's not consistent with having a child, if you are a loving person, I think. So I will be opting out breeding.
All right, good for you, brother. That's the main opt out to take is the no breeding. So the genetic buck ends here.
No, unfortunately, I come from a family of 9. My parents were not on this level with me, so.
So you have 8 siblings.
Yes.
So you only have 1 nephew so far out of 8 siblings. How many are you up to?
As far as siblings or nephews?
Nephews.
I only have 1. I'm a new uncle as of August 4th of this year. So.
But you have 8 other siblings. How many of your 8 siblings do you think are gonna make the choice you have not to breed?
Well, after my first nephew was born, that started the conversation among others. Everybody's guessing, who's going to be next?
Yeah.
And I told them, well, not me. Don't have to worry about that one. But my oldest brother, he's mentioned it, and his girlfriend is actually moving into his house, and so usually when that happens,
Yeah, that's the.
my other two brothers, and I have three more sisters. My older sister had my first nephew.
So how many nieces and nephews do you think you're going to have in over the next 10 years?
Um. I'm gonna say probably half as many siblings as I currently have.
Good Lord. And so what kind of conversation when your own siblings are having children? I mean, what can you say? Do you say anything to them? And what can you say at that point once once the bread is in the oven?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Once the deed has been done, you cannot undo it. So, just like carbon in the atmosphere cannot be undone, they have to live with the consequences of those critical decisions. They know, everyone in my family knows what I think is coming for us in a very short period of time from now. So, I try not to talk about it to them in front of my nephew, a small kid. It is very emotional, and increasingly so, given the type of distress anyone would be put into if they were told that their kid won't make it through high school, or if they do, the other side is some dystopic nightmare in which they don't want to make it through high school. So.
Dystopic nightmare. Is this your vision of where we're going? The classic Mad Max. Do you see? One of the main debates in this whole subject is. I was just reading this long, excellent article about Nafiz Ahmed. Now he's describing this as what I call the John Michael Greer downward stair step. That it's going what we're going to see over the balance of the century. It's going to be going down the stairs. It'll dip and then level out and then down, dip, down, and then there's the other school of thought, the over the cliff, that we're going to hit, as some people say, hit the wall at 67,000 miles an hour. It's going to look like this. Which one of these scenarios do you ascribe to?
I think of civilization, if you think about a normal bell curve, so,
yeah,
and then of course in the middle of the bell curve you have the peak. A lot of people assume as you're ascending up this function, this is production of civilization, civilization's growth, its demands on the earth. People assume that you don't began to see or feel the consequences of the collapse until after you make it over peak. That's not true. The pressures build up way before you get to peak. And that's why they explode and you have this instant turnaround. And this is true if over any type of overshoot in biological populations. And it certainly is true here. But if you're, a human being who is occupying less than 1% of 1% of 1% of the surface of the planet at any one time, it's really hard to see all of those implications, especially without the latest greatest technology and satellite technology and internet technology, supercomputer models to see what's happening around the planet. So I think it's very well likely that the collapse process is underway. It has been underway for probably some time. I can't give you a date. But as for everybody in the industrial world is wondering, well, when are we going to get to that point where my neighbor comes crashing through my door with a shotgun? That point, I assure everybody, is not too far away. But it's hard to say because you don't know how civilization is going to respond in the death throes.
Well, we're getting ready to find out. I think they're going to be talking about the Nathan's hot dog eating championship. Pretty much right up to till there are no more Nathan's hot dogs championships, because the winner of the contest would only need to eat one, because there will be no more Nathan's hot dogs. But I tend to agree with you. So you are not on board with the drawn out stair step collapse over the next 100 to 300 years.
I think what is going to usher climate change itself, I don't think it's going to usher in the collapse. It is a catalyst. It will be there and present in all of its glory and horrors. But there's so many other things that will be unfolding as those pressures mount. The crisis that we'll face, that I think it's going to collapse our civilization, will come from the refugee crisis. People in our generation, we've forgotten what it looks like to see people my age shredded by machine gun weaponry. We will be reminded. We forgot what it looks like to mow down what will be hundreds of thousands, millions of innocent men, women, and children at the U.S. border. I was telling Sam the other day, the most bleeding heart liberal Bernie Sanders supporter today, in this dystopic future of tomorrow, will be chanting, "Build that wall," while mounting machine guns on it. But whatever we try to stop going across our border at that point, what's happening in the country will be arguably worse. I mean, we're talking about the U.S. military will be totally unleashed on the domestic population, which is actually one of the most dangerous domestic populations in the world. As you know, we have 300 million guns. That's almost a gun per person here in the United States. We have culture of government rebellion. We have culture of militia. We have a very, very, very violent gun culture here. And we have a very, very militarized police force. And we are the most violent military force in the world. And all that will get to be unleashed, in the words of Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina. Here, the homeland is the battlefield. And it certainly will be as we get closer to these moments.
And I think the situation in Europe, I think, is actually going to be worse than here, with just the unbelievable southern populations coming into. At what point are people going to start firing on the refugee crisis? So what are going to be the drivers of the refugee crisis? Do you think it's mainly going to be are they going to be climate refugees, or just economic refugees, political refugees?
Well, there are already economic and political refugees, and there always have been. The Pentagon is clear. Climate change represents a catalyst to these situations. 2017, it was estimated that we had about 18 million refugees from climate. That number is going to explode, of course. And that number, just the Syrian situation, I think, is a good example for anybody who wants to look at this. Syria was struck by a devastating, historic drought, maybe the worst in that country, in that society's history. Certainly in its living memory. And that's just 9 million people, and right now we are facing the greatest refugee crisis since the Second World War. And that's really before, I mean, the shit is now being projected into the air and is moving toward the fan as we speak. So once it actually makes contact, I think we'll start to see an increasing number of refugees, but it won't get critical until the food supplies do, because people are much more hospitable. You invite people into your house when you have a full refrigerator, but if you only have a slice of cheese left, you close the door.
There is a Twilight Zone episode about that very, very subject, as I recall, down in the bunker. Yes, you mentioned the Syrian crisis, and now it's exactly what is playing out this summer in both Iraq and Afghanistan. The very same situation is being repeated, and hell, on some level, Australia. And as Noam Chomsky says, you look at the Syrian refugee crisis, that is, as Noam is calling, and I'll get your comment that come back in 10 years and what happened, what is happening and happened with the Syrian refugees is barely going. I think he says will barely be a historical footnote in the history books being written 10 years from now. Do you agree with Noam Chomsky on that, on his prediction?
I think that's right. I think we're looking at a situation. We got 300 million Chinese who live within 25 meters of the coastline. That's the size of the United States population, and they'll have to be evacuated 2030 and beyond. I can't say what date exactly all 3 million will be evacuated. But
300 million.
Yes. 300, and this is just on the coast of China, who will have to be evacuated inland. There will be efforts to save cities around the world: Shanghai, Miami, New York, Washington, D.C., London. But there's not enough capital or engineering to save all the coastal cities. And I think we'll save less than the names that I've mentioned, if anything at all is to be saved. But exactly that's right. We should start to see, and we are seeing, increased refugee crisis, and likes of which we have never seen. There will be no rest for the weary, and there will be no stabilization. Whatever attempts that we try now to stabilize the regions, those attempts will be ineffectual due to the increased threat of climate. The wet bulb temperature is serious. We're looking at temperatures reaching over 120 degrees in the Middle East. We're watching Northern Africa empty out. That process will continue. But as what's imagined that mankind is still going on in 2040, 2045, as the European crisis, immigration crisis has exploded, Europe itself, continental Europe, will be transitioning into the Sahara Desert. So the white people, that culture, won't survive, I don't think, beyond the middle of the century. And I think those are conservative estimates. And if it does survive, it's going to respond the way that culture has responded in World War I, World War II. And that's with massive casualties. That's with rampant nationalism and hyper-militarism. And that is quite scary thought.
Yes, sir.
And what's happening in India? I mean, look at what's happening in India. They're not playing around. They're not talking about being polite. They're building borders on their walls on their Bangladeshi border, and there's plans to put machine guns on them. We got 150 million in Bangladesh who will have to be evacuated. India is already going to supersede China with no addition of refugees. So their own birth population is already so.
And they're supposed to,
high.
2025, I guess, India is going to surpass China as the most populated country on the planet. And we were trying to figure, I mean, I don't know. We were talking about this yesterday. What, just purely in area and number of acres of land, I'm thinking India is about 1/4 the size of China, and it's going to have more population. It just floors me. But I'm not at all sure these population projections are going to happen, because reading today in today's mainstream media, they're talking 800,000 new climate refugees in India this week from the record flooding. We got half the country flooding, half the country in drought. It's just it's a perfect poster child, as goes India. Just if you want to see the planet a few years from now, go to India. And look at what's happening over there today, and you're going to be it's peeking into the future. At least that's mine. But I want this to be Antonio's talk, not mine.
Sam, that's a good point. Imperial, California saw the hottest rain temperature, 115.
It was 119.
119.
It was raining. It's
Wow.
called wet bulb in action.
So that's if we were not living in industrial civilization, or if the power went out, God forbid, we would be talking about a situation where hundreds of people would be dead.
It was air conditioning. It was global industrial civilization literally saved Imperial California last week.
And of course, you don't need temperatures at 119
With it
and
raining
raining to be deadly. They can be at 95 or 90 and still have a similar effects, especially for people who are old or young. But really, anybody at 119 with rain is going to go. But that's what we're. I mean, that's the subcontinent of India we're talking about here. I mean, we're only at 1.2 degrees Celsius above 1880, just using that baseline. Just moving to 1.5, that's the so-called aspirational goal for the IPCC. 1.5 is a global disaster movie that never ends. 2 degrees C is global catastrophe. And somehow those are the best case scenarios if we do everything right. If Hillary Clinton was elected in 2016 and actually didn't lie about going green as fast as possible, of course she's a fracker, but let's say she wasn't, and we did everything right starting in 2016. Everything. We're strapping down CO2 at 10 billion tons a year, solar panels, everybody's roof, wind turbines. If we did all of that, we would probably reduce the human population by close to 6 billion people by the end of the century, if that. And temperatures would be the way they were during the Eemian. So it would still be quite catastrophic, and I think the numbers would continue to decline for the human species thereafter 2100. So we'd be less than 1 billion by the end of the century if everything goes right. And so far, not only is everything not going right, everything's going exactly wrong.
Yeah.
So that should give you some indication, I think, of where we're headed here in the next decade or so.
Yeah, well, two of the headlines that we were just reading is Trump is basically just saying burn all the oil that you want to for as long as you want to, and relax the already ridiculously low regulations on coal burning power plants. It is full steam ahead with fossil fuel use in the U.S.
I'm actually a supporter of coal burning. In the end times, perhaps at work at the end times I wouldn't be a supporter, but coal is emitting huge amounts of sulfur dioxide into the lower atmosphere, and in doing so reflecting sunlight and causing a dimming effect. And if it weren't for that, we would not be here today. So we have to thank God.
Thank God for those coal burning plants, the whole global dimming thing.
So
yeah, this is one of the many conundrums that we are facing. I mean, everywhere you turn, it's frying pan versus fire on every level. Now, you mentioned just this morning, and I want you, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You were talking about, paraphrasing you, but I'm going to let him rip on this for a while, that you actually support a catastrophe, some sort of economic and ecological catastrophe. What exactly were you saying? And choose your words carefully. Do you support the collapse of global industrial civilization? Is that a good thing for the planet? Just run with that for a while.
For the planet, I think it's uncontroversial. It absolutely has to be a good thing for the planet that industrial civilization collapses. The sooner it does, the better it is for the planet. There will be extreme consequences for the planet when it does, and the consequences will be even more extreme for humans. When I say that I'm cheering on for a catastrophe, the longer we keep this set of living arrangements going, the less ability we have during the collapse to actually, if we can even, recuperate in any way. Because this civilization's main function is to extrapolate resources, exploit them, and to consume them as fast as possible. Well, if that keeps on happening, then collapse occurs. We'll be left with less resources to handle it or even to respond. So the sooner we start having major disruptions, and unfortunately this is how most animals respond to stimuli in their environment, is through extreme pain. And I know what that sounds like, and I understand what that means, at least for me. But people have to, unfortunately, experience enormous amount of trauma before they'll have the will to fight, if they're not destroyed by the trauma itself. But that's the clear decision that my parents made, that generation and their parents made, and we decided as at least as Americans, when we doomed our children and put Hillary Rodham Clinton and Donald Maniac Trump as the contenders in 2016. People generally over the age of 35 said, we don't want our grandchildren to survive. And so this is the offer. This is the choice we'll put up. It's death by, slit your throat or blow your brains out. So we chose to blow our brains out, I guess, with Donald Trump. But once we made that decision in 2016, we made sure for a fact, biblically speaking, Pharaoh and his army has been driven out to sea, and we are out to sea.
Yes, it was another frying pan versus the fire moment in the collapse of a planet. Hillary versus the Donald. Either way, we voted. It was a vote for the collapse of a planet. Speaking of frying pan versus the fire, I want to, of course, one of the big frying pan versus the fire moments that we're facing now is geoengineering. So I want you to, I'm gonna set you to going here, and I'm gonna get up and check our time because I forgot to do that. I forgot to bring a clock out here with us. But let's hear your opinion on geoengineering specifically to save the planet, and from there into the what I call the techno-utopian ideas that technology is going to save us, and a little bit about obviously the green alternative energy, particularly solar panels and wind energy. Just this whole thing. So start out with geoengineering and go out, start there and go to a bigger field and take a rip on that. Your opinion of all that.
Well, I think that as people like my mom, people like my dad, people like my professors at Appalachian State begin to realize that in fact we have decided to make sure that our children and grandchildren don't survive, they'll begin to get really panicked and scared. They'll start to see the weather whiplash and getting extreme. They'll start to see storms getting extreme. And they'll see the impacts around, and Rachel Maddow, of course, Anderson Cooper, Sean Hannity, and their overlord corporations are going to make sure that we don't hear about this as much as possible. You better believe me. If there are 500 fires, we'll hear about 5. If there are floods occurring across the eastern United States, we'll hear about 1 or 2. And we'll see a couple of snapshots of cars underwater or something, and that will be it. But as people start to realize around them their way of life is being threatened, they'll put political pressure on the leaders who actually brought us here to get us out, and that will take the form of geoengineering in response. Because obviously, no matter how fast you transition to renewables, that's not going to affect what's already in the atmosphere, what's already occurring. So the first one I think they're going to employ is solar radiation management, just because it's easier to do. That's going to have severe consequences on weather patterns. The IPCC, I think it's pretty clear in 2013, it looks at solar radiation management. It concludes 2 things, and we've heard this before, that climate change at this point is now irreversible. And the only way, if it is possible to reverse climate change, is through massive geoengineering of the Earth's atmosphere. And it ends the report by telling us that so far all schemes would be non-viable. They either have no effect or make the situation worse. But our parents have gotten us this far, so they'll make the situation worse. We'll start ejecting aerosols into the atmosphere that reflect sunlight. But as weather patterns continue to deteriorate, and this will do nothing for sea level rise, by the way,
Or ocean acidification.
or ocean acidification, and it may have the adverse effect of helping to destroy the rest of the grain harvest in the mid-latitudes. Other things I've heard about from IPCC co-authors is that we'll put space mirrors up and reflect sunlight. Just imagine what that looks like. Actually, we can
And the
imagine
blimps, the mylar sheets.
there was an episode of a cartoon called Futurama, if any of you are familiar with that, where they employ space mirrors to reflect sunlight, and it's kind of comical how that ends. There are ideas that we're going to refreeze the Arctic. I don't think people understand. We're not going to refreeze the Arctic, and we certainly aren't going to draw down CO2 from the atmosphere at scale for anyone born today to be affected by that.
No, I just read in Forbes magazine that they can make this thing in the lab, magnesite, and all we got to do is make 80 billion tons of this
Yeah.
per year, and problem solved. And we can go right on about business as usual. We just get people. There's a big job opportunities in the magnesite laboratory. Or maybe it's a job for you in a magnesite laboratory. We need 80 billion tons per year for the rest of humanity. So there's a job opportunity.
It's a very simple physics equation, equal opposite forces. We need a force as grand as civilization itself to counteract
The force of civilization. Yeah.
the force of civilization. And even if we were able to build that, we wouldn't feel the effects of that until after 2100 anyways. So things are going to get worse no matter what we do for the rest of the time that anyone breathing air today is going to be breathing air. And speaking of which, if we do fail to do anything, the atmosphere will be unbreathable by 2100 at 1,000 parts per million of CO2. Don't listen to Michael Mann. We're not going to coast down from 3 degrees Celsius, okay? We're not going to slash our emissions, whatever that means. The emissions are set to, just look at the reports coming out of the International Energy Agency. We will be ramping up coal. Under the Barack Obama administration, we began building the 40 to 50 year long infrastructure projects to keep gas flowing straight out of Canada, out of the shale fracking here in the United States. And yes, we'll have solar panels on some people's houses. But with that being said, we are going beyond a worst case. Well, we already are beyond a worst case scenario. Temperature rise is hovering above the IPCC's worst case projection. There was some hope in 2015, 2016 that CO2 emissions were beginning to level off. And now we find that they actually are jumping up.
Last year was the most ever in history, and
every year thereafter will be the same. I just remember I think it was my freshman year of college, we hit the 400 parts per million milestone, and now we're hovering somewhere between 408 and 412. So it is, and by the time my brother finishes college, it will be beyond 420. And that's historic. That's historic. No human's going to be able to survive the long-run equilibrium of that.
now, of course, nowhere have you mentioned the M word. You sounded kind of like the IPCC not wanting to mention the M word. So I assume you're a fan of Peter Wadhams.
Yeah.
and who I hope to be interviewing in the next few weeks here on Collapse Chronicles if we can just figure out a time and place to do it. But in a recent interview he had with Robert Hunziker, this the methane bomb. That Peter Wadhams, the way he's reading it, if I understand him correctly, but we're going to talk a lot more about it with him. That is the big, the sword of Damocles hanging over global industrial civilization's head. If the methane bomb that is blowing right now, as we're having this conversation, if it hits the famous 50 gigaton threshold, he says that global industrial civilization will not make it 5 years, and that the methane bomb is probably, if you have to pick one issue, it's going to be the thing that brings this house of cards down. What, just in your own private research on methane, do you agree with Peter's assessment that the methane bomb is the biggest hammer getting ready to hit us?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things about the methane bomb. It is certainly of the biggest, and if it is released, it will, I agree with Wadhams, immediately lead to, and immediate is 5 years, people. Immediate, that is 5 years.
It's not 5 months.
So within that time period, we will start to see increased temperature rise in the Arctic like we've never seen before. The methane veil will spread across the northern hemisphere, and likewise, I was talking to Dr. James White. He is the paleoclimatologist at the University of Colorado Boulder Arctic Alpine Research, and he studies climate shifts over Greenland and North America, and he reports that we've seen in the paleo record shifts over Greenland and North America of 10 degrees Celsius or more within a college career. We would certainly then see that. We would certainly see that. We would see places in Maine start looking more like Tallahassee, Florida. And we already are going that way anyways, but we'd see this within 5 years. We would see, and we are starting to see this. We're getting reports above Alberta. We're getting reports almost as far as the Canadian archipelago of temperatures reaching 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we are in the middle of that transition already, which is interesting because we have not gotten the 50 gigaton release, and we're starting to see it as if we have, or at least similar effects. That could mean several things. It could mean that Natalia Shakova described it as two things. It is most likely that methane release from the East Siberian Arctic Shelf is highly nonlinear and non-gradual, but there are scenarios where we do get gradual. I know that people are going to go after me, oh, this guy is conservative and he's not painting a grim enough picture. A gradual release of 5 gigatons over 10 years would overwhelm the current methane CO2 burden. So it's not as if we need 50 gigatons in a single release to be devastating. If we got 50 gigatons over 50 years, it would be way outstrip anything that we've seen from the CO2 emissions already. So we really are talking about small margins here that we have. The main problem is that once the methane gets up in the atmosphere, we'll see an immediate reversal of weather patterns, especially in the mid-latitudes where we grow food. And that's what I think Peter Wadhams is concerned about, is that we are talking about the collapse of industrial agriculture across the world. And we've already seen huge delays in crop, in stable crops across North America.
Delaware has been declared a disaster area. And Delaware is now, we have 2 disaster areas in the California from the wildfires, in Delaware from the collapse of agriculture in the state of Delaware in it took me completely by surprise. So
we just woke up yesterday to that headline.
What? Delaware.
So and we're going to see these episodes continue to play out throughout the European continent, throughout Eurasia, and throughout China, and they'll start, as we already have, began buying up food so that the third world can't eat, and that will exacerbate the refugee crisis, of course. And that's interesting.
In the bushmeat crisis, don't forget it. They're just going to eat every single earthling. Unless they've eaten everything, they're heading to the bread baskets.
Well, and I'll tell you very quickly of a little anecdote that was given to me by one of my professors in my last years. My professor, I don't know how old she was. She looks like she was late 60s, approaching 70, maybe older. But going into retirement, she told me a story of a friend that had passed away about 20 years ago. Her friend had lived through the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and she described what happened there. And I think it's for a student of history, as you should be, it's a warning to you and your families what's coming. But during the first wave of the famine, she reported that all of the pets in the neighborhood went missing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, are you listening to that, Santo?
And in the second wave of the famine, so then too did the children. So humans, when we get hungry enough, and none of us in the industrial world have experienced this type of hunger before, but when we get hungry enough, it will be ravenous. It will be ravenous. Which is another reason why I've chosen not to have a child, because they will be on the menu, especially if this happens sooner than later. So I think that people, I don't mean to scare anyone, I don't mean to alarm anyone. We are in fact an eighth species on a celestial body in the wilderness of space. And if we don't do right to make sure that our little wilderness stays sustainable, the worst will in fact happen, and we are seeing it happening. And as we said before, no one wants to talk about it. If we just ignore it, if we just have positive thoughts, it will go away. And I assure you this one will not.
Okay, well, I'm sure it was 38 minutes when I got up last time. So I'm going to wrap this up as I do with every one of these interviews. And I've never had the opportunity to ask this to a 25-year-old. So if you were not talking to Collapse Chronicles, if by some absolute miracle you had, Rachel Maddow, sticking a microphone in your face and saying, okay, you have a 60-second soundbite to give your message to the 25-year-olds on planet Earth. What is your message to the 25-year-olds in the year 2018 on planet Earth in 60 seconds or less? And Antonio Reid.
We are not doomed unless we choose to be. And that could mean anything. I don't think we're physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually doomed. We knew we were going to die from the beginning, but we didn't know that we would be witnessing the collapse of our own civilization within our own lives. There is no chance for us to escape alive. When I say escape alive, I mean to die peacefully on a deathbed, yelling at some nurse in some, old people's home or something like that. That is not the choice our parents made for us. And I do like to keep on emphasizing our parents. These are people who are highly intelligent, or at least I would say my parents are. They're college educated, own their own businesses. They're more capable of understanding the science. I have no scientific training of my own, and I've come to these conclusions. So I think what we have to do is first accept that there are going to be major impacts no matter what we do. And I think if we can accept that message in our hearts and in our minds, we will be able to respond. Notice that I'm not saying that we'll be able to achieve some glorious feat and save civilization. What I'm saying is that we will be able to respond. And that can mean anything. So my message for people, not just 25, but everyone, is be with the people you love them, and love the living planet.
There you go, brother. That's all it comes down to. All we've got is each other from here on out. And I'm glad I got this young man in my life. We had a fine party at Sandy's this weekend, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again next summer somewhere. One more party ahead. Anyway, folks, I want to thank this this fellow, Antonio Reid. Sancho Panza has survived Antonio's speech, so you're back home to the real world. He's getting in his gas sucking car and for a 10-hour drive. So I'm gonna get this young man back to his car and send him off, and we will see you down the line, brother. But we need more 25-year-olds on planet Earth like Antonio Reid.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Bye, guys.